Welcome back to another episode of Layers in Art. Today we have a look at the life and work of a few brilliant women artists that deserve more recognition and attention from art history and the public in general. By now, you probably heard of some of them, but perhaps of others not. Even though they were efforts to promote women in art, past and present, there are still many figures virtually unknown, even though they were just as talented and accomplished as their male contemporaries. Our inventory of exceptional women in art begins somewhere in the Renaissance and ends in postmodern times and is covered in two parts. I hope you enjoy this presentation and appreciate or maybe discover some names you didn't know before that will impress you. So let's get started with part 1. Catharina van Hemessen. She was born in 1528 in Antwerp, Belgium, and began to learn painting from her father, renowned painter Jan Sanders van Hemessen, who introduced her to his art patrons as she reached an astounding success in her career. But her skills are the main vehicle to her fame in aristocratic circles. Art historians claim her success during her lifetime surpassed that of Rembrandt, and Rembrandt really had success during his lifetime. Catharina van Hemessen is thought to be the first Flemish female artist that signed and dated her paintings and the author of the first self-portrait of a painter at work in his studio ever painted by any artist. Her work is composed of a few known portraits, some of them miniatures, and a few religious works, and her style can be categorized as Dutch and Flemish Renaissance by manner and subject of choice. She was commissioned by nobility for portraits, and her patron, Maria of Austria, who was also governor of the Habsburg Netherlands, rewarded her with a pretty high pension for the rest of her life. She was also a mentor for 3 male students and was high-ranking member of the Antwerp Guild of Painters. Despite her fame and status, she most likely gave up painting after her marriage because at a certain point in her life she stops painting but continues to teach. This was unfortunately a common occurrence for female painters. Catharina van Hemessen died at the age of 60 in Antwerp, and although in her lifetime she was internationally known, her name was and still is largely unknown to the wide public. Fede Galizia. She was born in 1578 in Milan, Italy, and was better known as simply Galizia. She learned painting from her father, Nunzio, and excelled pretty quickly at portrait painting. In her teenage years, she already received constant commissions for portraits and biblical scenes that were extremely popular in the 16th century. This is a portrait of Paolo Moricia, painted when she was 18 years old. Her style has all the trademarks of early Italian mannerism, with its theatrical, artificial enhancement in order to intensify the desired message or atmosphere of the painting. Her minute orientation, attention to detail were remarkable. That is why she painted mostly still lifes in a very realistic manner. The genre was rarely exploited at the time of the Renaissance and late Mannerism. It was something more specific to Dutch artists, and Galizia developed it to perfection. So much so that some of her paintings are compared to Caravaggio's fruit baskets in terms of attention to light, color, and texture. Galizia died at the age of 52 in Milan, succumbing to oblivion over the centuries, to be rediscovered sometime in the 1960s. Artemisia Gentileschi. Born in Rome in 1593, Artemisia Gentileschi was the most prolific female painter of the Baroque era. She began to study painting alongside her father, accomplished painter Orazio Gentileschi, and quickly surpassed the skills of her brothers. Creating in the style of Caravaggio, which was popular among young artists, also known as Caravaggisti, she made a name for herself, much to the pride of her bragging father. She established international fame and was commissioned by the likes of Cosimo II de' Medici, Grand Duke of Tuscany, Philip IV of Spain, and even Charles I of England, not to mention countless members of the nobility. She was the first female artist to be admitted to the prestigious Accademia di Arti del Disegno in Florence. Her work was based on Baroque principles, but very detail-oriented, masterful in rendering color, light, and dark tones, and painted many allegories, religious and mythological scenes. In her allegories that featured diverse female heroines, she oftentimes painted herself as the female character in the image. While she enjoyed a well-deserved success in her professional life, her personal life is marked by tragedy and misfortune. In 1611, when she was 18 years old, her father began a collaboration with another painter, Agostino Tassi, on a large-scale mural painting. While being in their home alone with Artemisia, Tassi raped her, with another man taking part. This was witnessed by a female friend of Artemisia that was living in the family home. However, she pretended to be unaware of the event and refused to testify later in the trial. And it gets worse. Her father made Artemisia marry her rapist to save her virtue and the family's honor, and she had to be intimate with him as well. It's only when her father realized that Tassi had no intention to marry Artemisia that he pressed charges for tarnishing the Gentileschi family name. At the trial, which lasted for months, Artemisia was made to wear a torture device called a thumbscrew in order to ensure she wasn't lying in her testimony. After that entire ordeal, it is believed that her aggressor was sentenced to exile in Rome. Until this day, there are contradicting theories whether he was indeed convicted for her rape and that he wasn't. It appears he was convicted and jailed before for other rapes. Artemisia later married and settled in Florence, Naples, and eventually in England, and encountered great success in every one of the places she stayed in. Charles I of England was enchanted with this talented female artist and commissioned many works from her, and some are still in the British Royal Collection today. Artemisia Gentileschi passed away at the age of 63, supposedly after the devastating plague epidemic in Naples. The feminist movement of the 1970s led to the rediscovery of this prolific female artist of the Baroque era under the research to find why there weren't enough female artists in the art world over the centuries. Rachel Ruysch, or Rachel Ruysch, as she is known in the Netherlands. Born in 1664, she was one of the rare female painters of the time, and she achieved greatness in the genre of still lifes during the golden age of the Dutch Baroque era. The fact that her father was a scientist specializing in botany had an influence on her preference for still lifes composed of an enormous variety of flowers. Also, still lifes were the types of subjects considered suitable for female painters. Portraiture and all the other subjects were, as a default, attributed only to men. And there were many difficulties for women if they wanted to study painting. They had to study anatomy by dissecting cadavers and make studies after nude male models, and had to be an apprentice to an older, more experienced artist for a few years, starting with teenage years. These were big reasons why female artists were scarce, because not everyone could study with their father or a relative. Rachel Ruysch studied her father's collection of flowers and different plants, made studies from them, and even taught him and her sister how to paint. Her father had a museum of curiosities, a collection of small animals and flowers, which he preserved with a secret embalming technique which he developed. Rachel helped him prepare his specimens in the exhibition. By the age of 18, she reached an international audience and had many patrons. She followed in the stylistic footsteps of flowers painter Otto Marseus van Schriek, but the genre was greatly improved under her brush. She married a portrait painter and had 10 children, but never stopped working, much unlike other female painters of that time. She earned more than Rembrandt for a painting. Her high earning was, without a doubt, a valuable addition to her household of 10 children. She died at the age of 86 and was of course forgotten in later years and centuries. She left a legacy of hundreds of still life paintings, achieving the status of mastery, today being recognized as one of the best still life Dutch painters. Élisabeth Louise Vigée Brun. Élisabeth Vigée Brun is probably the best known name of a female painter from the Baroque Rococo era. She gained notoriety after being selected by Queen Marie Antoinette to paint her at her court as an effort to improve her image. Few could afford to have their portrait painted by Vigée and Brun, mostly royalty and wealthy nobility. She was born in 1755 in Paris to a mother of modest origin and a father who was a fairly appreciated painter. She displayed skills from early on and took lessons from well-known painters after her father's untimely passing. She began to work professionally in her teenage years, and although she didn't need marriage for financial security, her mother insisted she marry an art collector, Jean-Baptiste Lebrun, great-great-nephew of Charles Lebrun, the first director of the French Academy of Painting. She later regretted the union, as her husband was a gambler and womanizer. In 1778 she became painter to Queen Marie Antoinette, of which she painted over 30 paintings, including her children. She painted many self-portraits as well, and one of these self-portraits with her daughter Julie caused a scandal when it was exhibited for painting herself smiling, showing her teeth, which was forbidden in conventional painting at the time. Another scandal was a painting of Queen Marie Antoinette in a simple muslin gown, which was usually an undergarment. When it was exhibited at the official salon, people were shocked at the Queen's extremely informal, intimate attire, and Vigée Lebrun had the painting redrawn and repainted. As a court painter to Marie Antoinette, Vigée Lebrun made a series of portraits of the Queen with her children in order to underline her role as a mother and try and be more relatable. Her image was really bad at the time and was harshly criticized for her spendings and lack of interest in what was generally happening in France, among common people especially, so these portraits were meant to fix her image in a sense. This portrait from 1787, with the Queen and her children, features an empty crib that Louis-Joseph points toward, referring to the recent loss of a royal child. After the Revolution, Vigée Lebrun continued to paint posthumous portraits of the Queen and the royal family, mostly in forms of allegory. She then fled France with her daughter and traveled to Italy and other countries, where she was received by artists and members of the nobility with great respect. She painted portraits of the nobility and society wherever she went and eventually returned to Paris. She died at the age of 86 in 1846 in Louveciennes, where she had been living for a while. She was celebrated throughout her life and after her passing, and is held in very high regard to this day as not one of the great female painters, but one of the great painters of the French Rococo era. Angelica Kauffmann, a woman artist that was truly one of a kind. Named the female Raphael of neoclassical painting, the most cultured woman in Europe, and one of the greatest talents in art of the 18th century. This is Angelica Kauffmann, a Swiss painter active in London and Rome. Born in 1741 in Switzerland, Angelica learned painting from her father, who often traveled with the family for different jobs. Angelica was a child prodigy, a gifted musician, a skilled artist from childhood, and speaking 4 different languages. In her early teens she had commissions for portraits from members of the clergy and nobility. The family moved around through Italy, in Milan, Naples, Florence, Rome, or Venice, so that the young Angelica could keep developing her career. She studied old masters and met local painters and became a member of the Academy of Art in Florence. At one point she met the family of the British ambassador to Italy, and his wife offered to help her move to London and introduced her to English society. There she befriended the renowned painter Joshua Reynolds, and they painted each other's portraits. Their close friendship was considered by some to be more than that, despite the great age difference between them, but it was just a rumor, not a certainty. Another alleged affair she supposedly had was with French revolutionary Jean-Paul Marat, who was living in London at the time. Angelica enjoyed a prolific career traveling around Britain and painting the portraits of several aristocrats and political figures. She became one of the founding members of the Royal Academy of Art in London. Alongside portraiture, she engaged in all subjects popular in the 18th century art: historical, religious, mythological, and allegorical painting, and she excelled at them all. Angelica moved to Rome, where she remained until the rest of her life. There she married for the second time and befriended the writer Wolfgang von Goethe. She enjoyed success, and after the loss of her parents and later husband, she was on her own, supporting herself with her art. She died at the age of 66, and because she had such notoriety, Italian sculptor Antonio Canova designed and planned her funeral in a similar manner to that of painter Raphael, with the highest honors for a painter. Her work can be found abundantly in England in the National Portrait Gallery, in the Royal Collection, but also in museums throughout Europe, the US, and private collections. There is even a museum made in her name, with many of her works in Austria, in Schwarzenberg, the Angelica Kauffmann Museum. Rosa Bonheur. Marie-Rosalie Bonheur was born in 1822 in Bordeaux, France, in a family of painters and sculptors. Her mother was a piano player and taught the small Rosa to read and write, as she preferred to sketch and draw instead. She was quite mischievous as a child and often got into trouble in school. Her father observed her talent and attraction to animal drawing and began training and guiding her in drawing and painting live animals as well as reproductions. Later she began studying the masters like Poussin or Rubens and made studies of dead animals, which on occasion she dissected at the Veterinary Institute in Paris. Her early success included animal-themed compositions such as The Horse Fair in Paris, Plowing in the Nivernais, Spanish Muleteers Crossing the Pyrenees, or Sheep by the Sea. She paints with photographic accuracy and elevates the genre of animal painting to its finest. By the late 1850s, she was in Scotland, enjoying the patronage of Queen Victoria, who greatly admired the peaceful imagery with animals and local shepherds coming out of Bonheur's brush. Her fame brought her to the United States, where she worked and exhibited for a while. She was awarded the French Legion of Honor by Empress Eugenie of France, being the only female at the time to receive it. In her career, she had tremendous success, but her personal life was not as easy. She was an adept of the dress reform and wore men's clothing, trousers and ties, mostly due to their practicality when working with animals, and she was harshly criticized for it. It was against the law for women to wear trousers, and Bonheur had to seek special permission from the authorities to wear them. She had two long-lasting relationships with female painter Natalie Micas and later with American painter Anna Elizabeth Klumpke, in the time when same-gender relationships were not only frowned upon but against the law in most countries. Rosa Bonheur died in France at the age of 77 and was remembered as the formidable painter that she was, being honored with different awards and exhibitions after her passing as well. She made it, in a sense, easier for other women artists to strive and make room for themselves, even in difficult circumstances. She earned enough money from her work to enable her to be independent and live her life as she saw fit, not how society expected her to. Berthe Morisot. If you are familiar with the works of Impressionist painters Claude Monet, Edgar Degas, Auguste Renoir, and especially Edouard Manet, you almost certainly heard of French Impressionist painter Berthe Morisot. She was mostly known for appearing in many of Manet's paintings. Berthe Morisot was born in the town of Ruysch in 1841 in a wealthy upper-class family. Her father was a public official and her mother, descended from the renowned Rococo painter Fragonard. By default, Berthe and her sister Edma were taught art as a common thing for young girls of the bourgeoisie. Berthe's talent was quick to emerge, and her family supported her to take lessons from the likes of Camille Corot or Achille Houdinot, famous plein air artists of the Barbizon group. It was forbidden for girls to join the academy and pursue a formal training in art, also to walk unaccompanied in the Louvre to paint after the great masters. On these occasions she met fellow Impressionist painters, young artists such as Claude Monet, Edouard Manet, or Edgar Degas. At first, Berthe started with watercolors and pastels, but grew to master oil and painting more and more and adhered to the Impressionist technique and sometimes left the image unfinished with the canvas showing. It was almost like a sketch in color and finished form. The subjects of her choice were women that she knew and their everyday life, her sister, her mother, and later her daughter Julie, who became her favorite model. She married Edouard Manet's brother Eugène, who fiercely supported her painting by taking care of the family while she was working. There is a rumored deeper connection, a kind of love that was unacted upon between Berthe and Edouard Manet, but at the time they met, Manet was married, so she chose her brother instead. Manet painted her image in many of his pictures and declared his wish for her to have been a male, because it would have been much easier to get all the fame and recognition that she deserved. Berthe Morisot died at the age of 54 in Paris from pneumonia that she contracted from her 16-year-old daughter. From then, she was known more as a companion of the Impressionists, a model for Manet, and the connection to him through marrying his brother. She was actually one of the first Impressionists, and her over 400 works of art are testament of the valuable contribution she made to European art. She was actually one of the first Impressionists, and her over 400 works of art are testament of the valuable contribution she made to European art. Mary Cassatt. She was born in 1844 in Allegheny, Pennsylvania, in an upper-class family. Her father was a stockbroker and her mother descended from a banking family. Her mother was extremely well educated, cultivated, and is believed that she had a big influence on Mary growing up. As part of her education, she spent 5 years in Europe, traveling, learning a few languages, and attending exhibitions in Paris, where she saw the works of Ingres, Corot, Courbet, or Delacroix. Against her parents' wish, she chose to make painting her career and enrolled in the Pennsylvania Academy of Fine Arts, only to quit a bit later because the pace of learning was just too slow. She managed to find work in the United States in order to finance her trip back to France because her parents would not support her art ambition. Back in Paris, she befriended Edgar Degas, for which she had great admiration for pushing the boundaries of Impressionism. Degas and Cassatt had their ateliers very close to one another, and they often worked together, Degas offering Cassatt advice on her art. Cassatt was very helpful also in Degas' later success in the United States. She repeatedly submitted work to the official salon, but were all rejected and decided to take a more modern approach to painting. Eventually, she joined the Impressionist exhibition and found a new friend in Berthe Morisot. Cassatt was the only American painter to join the French Impressionist group and work and exhibit alongside them. Cassatt never married because she knew she couldn't continue painting and working with the Impressionist group if she had a husband and children, so she dedicated her life to building her career. In the mid-19th century in America, there was a feminist movement that promoted the idea of equal rights for women, the right to higher education, equal employment opportunities, and the right to vote. Cassatt adhered to this movement, and she used her art to support it by placing women in the center stage as an important part of society by the role they play. The 1890s were Mary Cassatt's most prolific and rich productive years as she gained many supporters, but in the following century she was forced to slow down as her eyesight became increasingly impaired. By the 1920s, she was effectively blind and couldn't work anymore. She died in 1926 near Paris at 82 years of age. After her death, her memory was probably better kept than that of other female artists, but nevertheless she isn't usually mentioned in talks or writings about the Impressionist group. It's usually Monet, Manet, Degas, Renoir, Pissarro, Sisley, Basile, and so on. I hope you enjoyed this episode and will stay tuned for part 2 as we continue to discover riveting work of brilliant female artists in the late 19th century and 20th century. Thank you for watching.